The worst thing I ever did took less than 10 seconds. It didn't look like a crime. It didn't feel violent. It didn't even feel like a choice at the time. It was one small change on a piece of paper, and a life ended because of it. I'm telling you this now because I've learned something terrifying: you can ruin your life without meaning to. You can destroy someone else's life while still believing you're a decent person. And you can carry that contradiction for years until it turns into a second heartbeat inside your chest. It happened on a night shift. Hospitals are different after midnight. They don't sleep, but they change. The hallways grow longer. The lights feel colder. Voices drop to whispers like the building itself is trying not to wake the pain. I had been working there long enough to recognize the sounds, the soft squeal of cartwheels, the distant beeping that becomes background music, the quiet urgency in footsteps when something goes wrong. That night, I was exhausted in the way only long-term stress can exhaust you, when sleep stops helping and coffee stops working and you start living on pure momentum. I was also afraid. Not the kind of fear that makes you run. The kind that makes you rationalize. A week earlier, my supervisor had pulled me aside. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just spoke in that calm voice people use when they're about to change your life. He told me my performance had been inconsistent. He said mistakes had been noticed. He said the department needed reliability. He said my contract review was coming up. I nodded. I promised improvement. I smiled. I did everything people do when they're trying to look stable while their stomach is dropping. At home, my life was a tight box. Rent, bills, responsibilities. No cushion. No safety net. I didn't have a family that could catch me if I fell. I was the person who had to stay upright, because no one else would. So I became obsessed with not making mistakes. Which, ironically, is how mistakes get made. On that night, the workload piled up faster than we could clear it. Samples, reports, urgent calls, electronic alerts that didn't stop flashing. I moved through tasks like someone defusing tiny bombs. Cut the right wire, don't hesitate, don't think too much. Then I saw it. A report with my initials on it. Not because I had completed it. Because I was supposed to. The result wasn't ready, and it should have been. The test had been delayed. The samples were stacked. The phone was ringing again. Somewhere down the hall, someone needed an answer quickly. I remember staring at the screen, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. A single missing report. A single delay. A single moment of someone asking, why isn't this done? It sounds ridiculous now, but in that moment it felt like my entire future balanced on that one task. It felt like if I admitted the delay, everything would collapse: the trust, the job, the stability I had fought to build. The pressure didn't make me brave. It made me stupid. I looked at the previous patient's report. Similar order. Similar category. Similar numbers. Not identical but close enough that my tired brain whispered the most dangerous phrase in the world: close enough. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would correct it as soon as the actual result came in. I told myself the doctor would look at the overall picture, not just one line. I told myself a lot of things. And then I made the change. 10 seconds. Click. Copy. Paste. Save. A tiny act that felt like fixing a problem. A tiny act that was actually creating one. After that, my body went into autopilot. I moved on to the next task. The next sample. The next alert. Like my brain refused to stay in the moment long enough to feel what I had done. But guilt doesn't always arrive immediately. Sometimes it waits for a quiet room. A few hours later, I walked past an open door and heard a nurse speak in a low voice. Something about a patient being moved. Something about a decision that needed to be made fast. I didn't connect it to me. Not yet. Because the mind protects itself. It builds distance. It tells you, that's not about you. And I believed it. The shift ended at sunrise. The city outside looked normal. People were buying coffee, unlocking cars, starting their day. I walked out of the hospital feeling like a ghost moving through a world that had no idea what was sitting inside my chest. I went home and slept for 4 hours. Not real sleep. The kind that feels like you're drowning. When I woke up, I checked my phone. No messages. No calls. Relief hit me first. See, nothing happened. See, you were overthinking. See, it was fine. I was making tea when my phone finally rang. It wasn't my supervisor. It wasn't a colleague. It was a number from the hospital, and my entire body went cold before I even answered. The voice on the other end was calm, which made it worse. Calm means something has already happened. Calm means they're not trying to prevent disaster anymore. They're handling it. Can you come in for a moment, they asked. We need to go over something. I remember holding the phone, staring at my kitchen wall like it was the last normal thing I would ever see. I told myself there was a mistake. I told myself they just needed clarification. I told myself anything except the truth. But my hands were shaking as I got dressed. My heart felt too big for my chest. Every step toward the hospital felt like walking deeper into water. In the hallway, the same lights. The same cold shine on the floor. But the air felt different. The building felt like it knew. They didn't take me to my usual workstation. They took me to a small room with no windows. A manager was there. A doctor I had never met. Someone from quality control. They didn't accuse me right away. They asked questions first. Do you remember this case? Can you walk us through your process? Are you sure these results were verified? The report was on the table. My report. My initials. My 10 seconds. I felt like I was watching myself from across the room, like my body was there, answering questions, nodding, blinking, while my mind stood somewhere far away, screaming. I could have told the truth right then. I should have. But fear is not logical. Fear is survival without ethics. And I still had that reflex, the same one that had made me change the report in the first place. Protect the future. Protect the job. Protect the identity. So I did something even worse. I hesitated. I stalled. I said I would review the logs. And in that hesitation, I saw something on the doctor's face that I will never forget. Not anger. Grief. The kind of grief that comes from having to tell a family something they will never recover from. That's when the second sentence landed, quiet and fatal. The patient didn't make it, someone said. The room tilted. The air became heavy. My ears rang like an alarm had gone off inside my skull. I wanted to ask, which patient? As if the answer could save me. As if naming them would make it less connected to my hands. But I already knew. Because guilt recognizes its own shape. They kept talking, but the words blurred. Something about a decision made quickly. Something about a treatment chosen based on results. Something about how, in medicine, minutes matter. Minutes. And I had stolen minutes. With 10 seconds. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just sat there, perfectly still, because some part of my brain understood that if I moved, I would shatter. I remember thinking something horrible, if I stay calm, maybe this won't be real. But reality doesn't care how calm you are. Reality doesn't rewind. That day, I walked out of the room with a secret heavier than my own body. Not just the secret of what I had done, but the secret of what it meant. That someone had trusted the system. And I had poisoned it. Not out of cruelty. Out of fear. And fear, I learned, can be just as deadly. The days after the incident felt unreal. Not chaotic. Not dramatic. Just, distorted. Like I was walking through a version of my life that had been slightly misaligned with reality. No alarms went off. No police showed up at my door. No public investigation was announced. The world didn't react. But my body did. I started waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, my hands shaking as if they were still hovering over that keyboard. Every sound felt louder. Every silence felt heavier. At work, people spoke to me normally. That was the worst part. No one knew. No one suspected. The system had absorbed the damage quietly, just like it always does. A report was filed. A conclusion was written. A medical complication was recorded. And the truth disappeared into paperwork. Except it didn't disappear from me. It settled. Like a weight behind my ribs. I tried to convince myself it wasn't entirely my fault. I repeated the same excuses my brain had used that night. The workload was too heavy. The system was flawed. The numbers were similar. The doctor should have double-checked. All of those things were technically true. And none of them mattered. Because I had changed the result. I had created the wrong information. And someone had made a life and death decision based on it. I started seeing the hospital differently. Every hallway felt like an accusation. Every monitor beep sounded like a reminder. Every patient looked like a question I didn't want to answer. How many people trusted this place? How many people trusted the data? How many lives rested on tiny details no one ever noticed? And how many of those details were in hands like mine? The guilt didn't scream. It whispered. It whispered when I washed my hands. When I signed my name. When I corrected minor errors like my life depended on it. I became obsessed with perfection. Not because I wanted to improve. Because I was terrified. Terrified that another mistake would prove I hadn't learned anything. Terrified that my silence would become a pattern. I worked harder than ever. Double-checked everything. Stayed late. Volunteered for extra shifts. People started praising my dedication. They had no idea it was fueled by fear. At home, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt crowded. Crowded with thoughts I didn't want to have. I imagined the patient's family. The phone call. The empty chair at dinner. The questions that would never have answers. I didn't know their names. But I carried their absence. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, what if I had just waited? What if I had said, the results aren't ready? What if I had accepted the risk to my career? But what if doesn't change what happened? And what happened had already taken root inside me. The worst part wasn't the fear of being exposed. It was the realization that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Not legally. Internally. Once you learn what you're capable of under pressure, you can't unlearn it. I started questioning myself in ways I never had before. Was I a good person who made a bad choice, or a scared person who chose convenience over truth? Would I do it again if the pressure returned? I didn't like the uncertainty in those questions. So I avoided them. I buried myself in routine. In efficiency. In the illusion of control. But control is fragile. And guilt is patient. One evening, a new case crossed my screen. Different patient. Different data. Same urgency. My hands froze. Not because I didn't know what to do. Because I knew exactly what not to do. This time, I waited. I told the doctor the results were delayed. I documented everything properly. I accepted the risk of looking slow. Nothing bad happened. No one died. And that simple outcome felt heavier than any praise I had ever received. Because it proved something painful. I had always had a choice. The first time, I chose fear. The second time, I chose truth. And only one of those choices let me sleep at night. That's when the pressure inside me shifted. Not toward confession. Toward responsibility. I couldn't undo what I had done. But I could stop becoming the kind of person who would do it again. I started speaking up more. Questioning rushed decisions. Slowing processes that felt unsafe. Not dramatically, just firmly. Some people rolled their eyes. Some thought I was overcautious. I didn't care. Because caution felt like respect. Not for the system. For life. The secret still lived inside me. But it no longer controlled me. It reminded me. Reminded me that 10 seconds can change everything. Reminded me that silence has consequences. Reminded me that survival without integrity isn't survival at all. Still, there was something unresolved. Not legally. Emotionally. Because I had never faced the part of myself that made the original choice. I had corrected my behavior. But I hadn't confronted my fear. And fear doesn't disappear just because you behave better. It waits. For another moment of pressure. For another excuse. For another small change. I knew the truth would eventually demand something from me. Not punishment. Honesty. And honesty is more frightening than consequences. Because it changes who you are. The truth doesn't always come as a confession. Sometimes it comes as a mirror. For a long time, I believed that what haunted me was the patient's death. The consequence. The outcome. The irreversible loss. But that wasn't the deepest wound. The deepest wound was knowing who I became in the moment when pressure met fear. I didn't choose cruelty. I didn't choose harm. I chose convenience over courage. And that choice changed how I saw myself forever. Every time someone praised my work, I felt a strange distance from the compliment. They were talking to the version of me that followed the rules now, not the one who had once broken them when it mattered most. I wasn't proud. I was cautious. And caution, when it's driven by guilt, feels like punishment disguised as discipline. The hospital kept functioning. Patients kept arriving. Decisions kept being made. Life kept moving forward in the way it always does without pausing for moral reflection. But I didn't move forward the same way. Inside me, there was a quiet divide. The person I had been before that night. And the person I became after it. The first believed in systems. The second believed in responsibility. Because systems fail. But responsibility belongs to a human being. I started noticing something unsettling about myself. I no longer trusted my instincts. Every decision felt heavy. Every action felt weighted with potential consequence. Every small choice carried echoes of the one that had ended a life. Some people would call that anxiety. I called it awareness. I had learned the cost of treating details as disposable. And once you understand that, nothing feels small anymore. I thought about the patient often not in specific memories, but in meaning. Not as a face, but as a presence. A reminder. A reminder that real lives exist behind numbers, reports, and check boxes. A reminder that pressure doesn't excuse harm. And a reminder that silence can be just as dangerous as action. I never told anyone what I had done. Not because I was afraid of punishment. Because I was afraid of what it would confirm. That I was capable of making a choice that cost someone their future. And that knowledge was heavier than any legal consequence could ever be. But something changed over time. Not the past. My relationship with it. Instead of trying to erase what I had done, I started carrying it with intention. Not as shame. As responsibility. I became the person who slowed things down when everyone else rushed. The person who questioned shortcuts. The person who refused close enough. Not because I wanted to feel better. Because I didn't want to forget. Forgetting would make it easier to repeat. And repetition would make it a pattern. One evening, after another long shift, I stood in the hallway alone. The lights buzzed softly above me. Somewhere, a monitor beeped in a steady rhythm. Life was still happening. And I was still part of it. But now, I understood something I hadn't before. Every role that carries responsibility also carries consequence. You don't just perform tasks. You shape outcomes. And outcomes don't care about your intentions. They only care about your actions. I used to think morality was about big choices. Right versus wrong. Good versus bad. Now I know it lives in small ones. In 10 seconds. In one click. In a single moment of fear. I don't believe I'm a monster. But I no longer believe I'm just human either. Because just human is how people avoid accountability. Being human means owning what you've done. Even when no one else knows. Even when no one asks. Even when silence would be easier. I didn't confess. But I changed. And change is its own form of truth. The patient will never come back. Their family will never get answers. And my mistake will never be undone. But my future choices can still mean something. Not as redemption. As responsibility. If you're listening to this and you've ever told yourself that a small compromise doesn't matter, I want you to understand something. Small choices shape big outcomes. Quiet decisions echo loudly. And pressure reveals who you really are. You don't need to be perfect. But you need to be honest. Because honesty is what keeps fear from becoming fatal. I made one small change. And someone died. Now I live every day making sure that no small choice ever feels small again. Not because I'm afraid. Because I finally understand the weight of being responsible for another human life. And that weight is not something you ever put down.